welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. It's been a long-awaited conversation with David Denton. He's a busy man. He's finally back on the show. It's been a little while, David. It's a pleasure to have you back on the show. Do you mind introducing yourself to everyone out there listening?
Always a pleasure. And Robbie, glad to be back. Lots to talk about. Release of documents here earlier this spring and ongoing, and various new things have come to light that certainly bear scrutiny. So glad to be here to talk about it.
Now, with the recent releases and the hearings, I mean, there's been so much since we last talked that has kind of happened. Did you expect any of this to happen? I mean, obviously, Trump said before, and then the time after that he was going to release files, and it seems like we got a file release, and I'm seeing a lot of people saying they're just nothing burgers, which I don't think is necessarily true. I think we get a better depiction on some certain events or details that researchers or people that have been investigating it for a while have kind of been looking for.
Well, I think if you went into it with a limited expectations, knowing that, you know, in a simple world, hey, let's release all the files tomorrow and we can look at everything and we'll not have all the answers. That would be a Pollyanna viewpoint, in my impression, from the get-go. You're dealing with government bureaucracies, whether it's Donald Trump in charge or Joe Biden or whomever, and the folks below them making decisions about what should and should not be released. But there was more public pressure, more scrutiny building this time. The Trump administration, wanting to prove that they're transparent, have released quite a few documents. I think the one person who's kind of been the point on that has been Congresswoman Luna, who has been working with Jefferson Morley, and they've had some hearings and got some things to light and push things. I think we've finally seen at least most of the Joe and Ides stuff that Jefferson Morley has been fighting for so long, and that's been somewhat revelatory. I mean, or maybe not. Maybe it's kind of what we already suspected, that Joe and Ides had a relationship with or a connection to Oswald prior to the assassination, along with many of the Cuban exiles he was dealing with and some of the operations that Joe and Ides was in the middle of. And of course, what makes that storyline even more significant is the CIA, one, had Joe and Ides be the liaison to the House Select Committee in the 1970s, kind of a disseminator of information. And it's the classic, the fox running the hen house type of thing, if you want to use a simple metaphor, but with a man who was in the middle of things with Oswald and the Cuban exiles being the person who controlled the flow of information to Congress in the 1970s. And then finally, the CIA, right up through a few months ago, when they finally admitted, Joe and Ides, there was a connection there after denying it for so long. So if folks were looking for a true hot smoking gun out of the whole giant Joe and Ides thing, they didn't get that. But I think it's what maybe the last time I'm on here, I mentioned this idea that ultimately you're going to get some admissions from the intelligence community that, there was a connection between Lee Harvey Oswald and the intelligence community in the United States. But in some respects, that might be a limited hangout, because I think it goes much deeper than that with Oswald. But at least we're moving that needle where there's some sort of official recognition that Oswald was just not some lone nut who made some isolated decision to kill the president of the United States and had and there were none of these tentacles around him when there were. And now, what does that mean? That means we keep looking, we keep digging, and I think there are plenty of information out there to suggest that Oswald was in fact a patsy, used by higher forces, and we think we have a good idea what those forces were. But it's catching up to the truth, I guess you could say. I hadn't put it that way, but I think that's that, at least that element. There were other things too. I don't know if you want to jump in with a question before I go into some of the other.
Yeah, you make a great point about the whole Oswald thing and just a better picture. I think we're trying too much to want that these files are going to say what we want them to say, as in like, here is the grand all end all, guaranteed 100% it was a conspiracy. Here's this. The main thing that you get from it is that there was definitely a relationship, or someone knew more than they knew about Oswald. I was actually surprised when Tunheim, I believe it was in the second JFK hearing, had stated that in his opinion that he believes that what all this information and all this kind of hiding and covering up was the fact that they had a longer or bigger existing relationship with Oswald than they had admitted originally, and that they've been trying to cover that up. And for what that goes into, I don't know. But again, that changes what the official story was that they didn't know Oswald. He was just a lone nut, no relationship ever. We've learned over the years now that there was a relationship there. Now we know there's a deeper one with certain individuals. So again, I think that kind of changes the narrative, and that should cause anybody to want to look into it a little bit more. But I'm curious what you were able to come across that was interesting to you about the new document releases, and what.
Well, I've one of the other things that was extremely important that people were anticipating, researchers like Jim Diagino and others were interested in, the Schlesinger memo, which was done right after the Bay of Pigs. Of course, Schlesinger was the key JFK advisor that had been censored for so long. Where basically Schlesinger basically writes this scathing indictment of the CIA, and after the Bay of Pigs, that they were a state within a state, they were out of control. It just and it actually gave statistical evidence. The suggestion that 47%, I think, was the number of folks working in the State Department across the world for the United States were really CIA. That there were over 120 CIA agents alone in the Paris embassy. Now, Paris was not our, antagonist. Paris was an ally. What did we need 120 agents inside the Paris embassy? It did, and that kind of information, Schlesinger's saying these people are out of control, and that was important. Now, from my own standpoint, I came across some documents that really illuminate that further. A, we'll call a Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, I think would be the title to be given to a special working group that John F. Kennedy set up, and they were, some of the quote best and brightest, the folks loyal to him, people inside outside of government that would have some expertise in terms of intelligence, and it was created. Again, the thing coming out of here that seems to be a real spark, and it's not something we didn't already know, but the whole Bay of Pigs debacle just set in motion a whole lot of things that Kennedy was interested in changing, that he understood that this monster that was the intelligence community and the CIA and its tentacles, its power, and he wanted to do something about it. And this advisory board was to analyze things, talk to members inside the CIA, come to some conclusions, make some recommendations. He had people on there like Clark Clifford, I think they're him, important advisor for many presidents, Truman, Kennedy, and
LBJ.
LBJ, of course, right, and James Jimmy Doolittle, the World War II war hero, he was on there. A man named Killian, who was former MIT. They had intellectual and academic scholars like Killian, kind of across the board operation. And there were a number of documents. They had meetings throughout JFK's tenure, right up until they had a meeting on the day JFK died. They had meetings afterwards, and there's a really change in things, which is rather disturbing. But the committee gave recommendations. They obviously, and I'll talk about those in a minute, but they obviously were very disturbed and even in some cases disgusted with the reaction or the cooperation of the CIA in terms of their gathering information, discussing potential reforms. A lot of the same, the pushback that the House Select Committee that we were talking about earlier in the 70s, Scott, this committee also did. And they talked about how the CIA's obfuscation, I think is the right word, and there are a lot of discussions about that. But what really happened that was ultimately important, well, let's start off with one of the very first meetings in May of 1961. JFK actually came in and participated in that meeting. And what was extremely telling about that was JFK from the get-go told him, I don't know if we can have even allow the CIA to conduct covert operations. He from the get-go he's establishing about these people are out of control. We may just have to take this power away, and that's me paraphrasing. Okay, that's not I don't have it in front of me word for word, but he says I don't see how I'm not sure how we can allow this to continue. Then he makes a point that, look, besides Laos and Cuba, I have no idea what the CIA is doing around the world in terms of covert ops, which is an incredible statement, too. You're the president of the United States, and you're so in the dark that you don't know what this agency is doing beyond a couple countries that we're familiar with. He understood what was going on, that it was some stuff was going around the world. He just didn't have a handle on it, and wanted to have one. And so the meetings occurred again throughout the next 2 to 3 years. Then I think it's telling. I use the word telling, but there were 2 meetings after JFK's death. It was obvious. One was in January of 1964. And I looked at all the transcripts from all these meetings. It's pretty obvious the disgust the committee had with the CIA, and the fact they were going to make recommendations, but they didn't really put them down on a paper that I could see until this January 30th of 1964 meeting I'm talking about, which really was a meeting for Lyndon Johnson. It was to inform Lyndon Johnson what this committee had recommended to JFK. And boy, this was I found this document late when I was, of course, I put this into an article. I came across this document late, like, wow, it's like, it listed 170 recommendations to reform the CIA. And the ones that really stand out, okay, one, it was obvious that they were trying to rein in the head of the CIA and put him under more control of the president, because they recommended that the head of the CIA be stationed in the White House, which of course is obvious. They're trying to, keep them under the control of the president. Okay, that one was apparent. 2, the fact that the CIA should consider giving up covert action ability and transferring to some other agency. Okay, that's telling in itself, right? I use that word telling again. And then 3, probably the most revelatory one was that they should consider actually changing the name of the CIA, make it disappear. I mean, they the recommendations of that committee were in effect a a a realization of JFK's statement that we've all familiar with, scatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. But what do we have on paper that really suggests that they were going to do it? Here it is. Here's an actual organization determined to to bring it into the reign of the CIA by controlling its director, by removing its covert action ability, and even changing the name like it no longer existed. I mean, this is significant stuff. And of course, none of those things came to pass. We know our history. One more meeting 6 months later in June. The same committee that was so critical of the myriad of covert action operations going on around the world. First of all, they bring in another gentleman. I forget his name. My good friend Casey Quinlan pointed out this guy was in the middle of intelligence activities in the whole world of intel himself. All of a sudden, he's brought into the committee, and instead of being critical of all these operations going on, the CIA just came and said, oh, we've got so many. I don't know. It was like what the number was. It was like 30 plus something. Just covert action options or operations going on around the world, and they're describing these things. And the same committee that was so adamant about bringing about changes, to say, oh, okay, we'll look at that. They just acquiesced. They, from being a critical of the CIA, they just almost rubber stamped the same covert action that JFK had earlier talked about, wishing he knew what was going on. They just validated. So you almost saw a change before and after JFK's death, and it's pretty revelatory, I think, to see that just how far that JFK wanted to go to bring her into the reign of the CIA, and that to me is very important in terms of what I was looking at.
Would you be surprised to know that LBJ had some conflicts with his presidency in the CIA?
I would say yes. I mean, I'm not surprised. I mean, if
Not as bad as JFK's. LBJ was more getting mad at the FBI later on, but
I would say, all right, I'm a history guy, right? And this just came to mind. I think it's a really good analogy here. Uh, let's go back to the French Revolution, and of course, who who emerged out of the French Revolution, but Napoleon. Uh, and at a certain point, there's a coup d'état. Okay, here's our parallels. Okay, and the coup d'état was not well ran, but between Napoleon, his brother, and a few other people, they managed to ascend to power. But it was a tripart, 3-man committee that was with Napoleon being one of them. And I think those people thought they would control Napoleon, right? They were wrong. Once Napoleon ascended into power, nothing else mattered. He will be calling the shots from that point on. They underestimated him. You see the metaphor I'm getting at here?
mm-hmm.
I don't think the CIA may have thought, we're going to get rid of JFK. We're going to, have our way on intelligence, activities. If once JFK's out of the way, Johnson's going to be his own man. He's going to do what he's going to do, and he's not going to give up power once he has it in his hands. So I don't know in a general way, if the CIA thought they were running the show when Johnson took over, they were wrong. I mean, Johnson's going to do what he wanted to do, and and that included setting aside the Cuba thing. I mean, we all know that Johnson wasn't really interested in going into Cuba.
I think his only concern through Kennedy's presidency that he took over the rest of, and for his first term until around 65, 66 years was what more a little bit focused into Vietnam. But most of his telephone calls are dealing with domestic issues and press reporting on him or dealing with the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah, so I mean, it was as far as the CIA's agenda, I think probably they were disappointed that there wouldn't be more action in Cuba, but at the same time, Johnson's throwing this new, uh, opening the door for new adventures in Vietnam. In fact,
Well, not just Johnson either. It was McNamara and others that were also admitting to giving wrong information to LBJ, and LBJ just wasn't paying attention. He's like, "What? You need how many? Okay, I'll send it over." I have those calls have been the most illuminating for me because I think you look at the documents. You hear McNamara, Dean Rusk, Schlesinger, all these people that are mentioned in Kennedy's inner circle, and now I have a different opinion of them because I have a Schlesinger book. It's LBJ and McGeorge Bundy talking on the phone, and they're talking about how Schlesinger just wrote a whole book about JFK, but also slashed Dean Rusk throughout the book. Said his face looked like a chubby Buddha, like all this type of stuff. And I'm like, wait, I thought these were all the people that were in the Kennedy administration. Johnson took over. I mean, he used Kennedy's death as a ploy to get these people onto his side. There's phone calls of that, but I don't
right.
know. It had me confused about who to trust in the inner circle. It's not just the people, the CIA. It seems like all of Kennedy's office seemed to be a little bit contaminated.
Well, let me just say this. I mean, circle back to those advisory board documents in that committee this board that was meeting. I mentioned the day they were meeting on the day of the assassination. The minutes of the meeting reflected that there was a argument going on then, whether or not covert action capabilities or covert actions taken in Vietnam would be under the auspices of the military or the CIA. So they're actually talking about who's going to, who is going to be running the show in Vietnam from an intelligence aspect the day of the assassination. This board was. So we know there was an ongoing struggle. And then, Johnson, you know, I know it's not necessarily a direct quote, but maybe it is. I think Stone put it in his movie, right? I'll give you your damn war. And Johnson did give him the war in Vietnam you know, which was certainly another venue in which the CI really wanted to operate and bring influence and control over that part of the world.
Who do you believe in documentation or just from what you've learned in Kennedy's inner circle was someone that was trustworthy or um, of Kennedy's side? It seemed like the only two that I've been able to really find have been Ted Sorensen,
I
um,
mentioned Sorensen first, yeah.
and
Well, I
then
think
also
Schlesinger. I know you said I don't necessarily see those guys as being,
put
you know,
O'Donnell in the mix.
Kenny O'Donnell. I'm not saying all those folks were stabbing JFK in the back to that extent. I just think they, they were convinced by Johnson to come on board, and by doing so, I think they were, you know, some respects under the Johnson influence and the things that Johnson wanted to do, and maybe that might involve, doing, just for instance, let's take McNamara. I mean, McNamara was a visionary, idealist,
Mathematician.
purist under Kennedy. Then what's he doing? With the Gulf of Tonkin, he's lying about the fact that they were actually running covert ops off the coast of Vietnam. He's compelled to lie about what was going on that really orchestrated the Vietnam War. How did he come to the point from the idealist, the purist to that? Well, he evolved. I'm not saying that McNamara was and hopefully McNamara made some admissions about that. But I'm not saying that he was that, he was, you know, deceitful towards Kennedy or behind his back. He just wants you, I think you make some parallels about folks that when you're dealing with somebody that's, you can look at, today's world without getting too deep into politics, but you want to go work for Donald Trump, or you want to do that, are you going to can you do that and still maintain all your principles and ethics and do things the way you want to when you know this guy's going to be he's going to want his way and do it his way, and he doesn't really care about anything? You really think you can keep yourself pure? you know I think these guys that thought they could keep themselves pure working for Johnson.
There's a good take by George Reedy on people's demeanor around a president, and I think it makes perfect sense. Where he talks about if you ever try to be around the president, you don't know what to do with your hands, you don't know what to do with your legs. You're basically shaking, and basically whatever he says, you'll hear someone rebuttal the president one time in the beginning, and then as soon as they state their point, they agree with them the rest of the time through. And I think that's exactly what happened with McNamara. I think it's exactly what happened with everyone that did a complete 180 when Johnson became president. And he said it's not the specific president. He said it's just the power of the presidency that people do not know what to do. It doesn't matter if you hate the person that is now the president. You are standing in a room with someone who you know is now the most powerful person almost in the free world. And he stated that in an interview, and it just made a lot more sense of why these people that were always admitted to so close to JFK completely did a 180. But not only that, Richard Russell, the guy we always mention with the Warren Commission, who told Johnson he didn't want to serve on the commission, and Johnson threatened him. He's on Face the Nation interviews talking about Vietnam, how we need to be sending more troops in there and how we need to be upgrading it, and that we're not spending enough, and Americans who haven't served in a war need to step up and do their part. It's to me, it's like, oh, how are we using this guy as an example of someone to JFK's assassination when he's the complete opposite mindset of what JFK was? Again, it's conflicting. Again, it's probably different than what might reflect in some documents.
Reedy, you mentioned Reedy, who George Reedy was, of course, his press secretary, and he was a loyal Johnson guy. But he would later admit that, Johnson simply could not tell the truth. He said something to the effect that the victim of the biggest of the Johnson whoppers was Johnson himself. That he couldn't, he believed everything he said and the lies he told. And I'm thinking, well, George, how come you're still there? And maybe that's because if you knew the guy was a liar, why are you working for him?
Because you have to
Maybe
double
what you
down.
just said, the power of the presidency just drew those people in. Uh, but yeah, I think Swordson stayed loyal and true to the president. Kenny O'Donnell did. Some other folks, Bundy, man, he did some things before and afterwards that definitely bear scrutiny. Uh, McNamara just decided he'd be a good soldier, I think. Schlesinger, I'm not sure how much, you dug into that more than I have. I think Schlesinger was always first and foremost a Kennedy guy. Whether he, bended the knee a little bit to Johnson's another story. But it's almost like you make a good point, Rob. It's almost like the folks you can see the before and I mentioned the before and after of that committee that totally changed their tune about covert action and CIA's uh, greenlighting the CIA covert action around the world and changing their attitude about that. I think the same is true for the individuals who chose to remain after Kennedy's death and be a part of Johnson's administration. That it's a different world dealing with a different guy and a different set of rules.
Did you find anything else in the document release that you thought was interesting? Still along the same, I guess, lines or points of a lot of people always mention the point of look who benefited after JFK's assassination. And honestly, from where I stand and what I've seen through a lot of the LBJ library, a lot of the JFK library, and some mix of phone calls and interviews of oral histories throughout, Honestly, I think a lot of people didn't care too much about JFK dying, at least from the names that we've seen, besides people like Ted Sorensen and Donald, who obviously a lot of people said that they were wrecked by it. I think Ted Sorensen even left to write a book about JFK. Um, but you start to see that everyone just kind of continued with their normal routines. Like Hoover did his thing, Reedy did his thing, Larry O'Brien did his thing. Everyone just kind of continued on and then just served the next guy standing without even taking the time to, go through the process or feeling like they were so dragged down by the assassination.
I can't, I can't get inside the heads of those people and what they're, where the country was. I think the country wanted to carry on, to pick things up, to somehow keep the country going. Maybe some of that might have been some twisted sense of patriotism. I don't know. I mean, but yeah, that's apparent. You ask about some other things.
Yes.
Now, I haven't. That's probably. I've came across some other tidbits and things that are interesting. I have again the problem with the new documents is they were, basically the new set that started being released in late spring, and we've still seen some. We just got another batch of JFK documents, and I haven't even had a chance to go back and look at those yet. And then a big, massive release on the MLK files as well. Is that they this latest sense of latest release they have did not attach a search engine uh, to that where you can just go in and put somebody's name in or a a some sort of operation or title or anything like you could in the previous documents. So it's just one, pick a document and open it. It's there. I mean, you're basically pot luck in trying to find things for now. So I would argue, now they've said at some point they'll probably put a search engine in once they get everything released. We'll see about that. But it also means in the meantime, there's probably some stuff that things people have missed because everybody's in the same boat here. That you don't have a search engine, you can't go in and look for targeted information. It's just something you might come across. But some things that were interesting. It was interesting that the at one point the CIA's reach uh, in terms of what they were actually doing. They actually were monitoring Jimmy Hoffa, who was giving speeches, I believe, in Europe and in France to union organizations overseas. So the CIA had their eyes on him. Uh, Interesting. There was a document released where a key Martin Luther King individual gave a speech to some foreign dignitaries suggesting that the CIA was behind the assassination of Martin Luther King. That was an interesting that they were monitoring, and that was a domestic operation. Uh, and
I thought it was common thought that people thought the FBI was responsible for the Martin Luther because you have the suicide note
yeah,
or the fake
this was
suicide note.
different though. This was CIA stuff, and I think this comes out of what I believe is called Operation Chaos, where in '68 and beyond, the it was secretly opened the door for the CIA to conduct in the United States military to conduct intelligence operations against their own people.
Yeah, well, they were using Haight Ashbury clinics and giving people drugs. That's where Manson was connected in with the Operation Chaos stuff. Tom O'Neill's the one who discovered that.
Yeah, and this was an indication the CIA was monitoring a key King official after MLK's death. Uh, yeah, and then I think something that got a lot of folks' attention. I was aware of it. I think it bears more scrutiny, but I also think we have to be careful. But I think it's something that's out there, and you know, I don't know, you're on social media like me, and you're you for instance, on X, I recall once the documents started going out, people started finding stuff about Mossad and Israel,
Again,
particularly Mossad and Israel's connection to.
I know this gets mentioned, but I just want to put this out there. Please, for everyone, go out there and listen to the HSCA testimony of Ralph Salerno when he talks about the mob being from Sicily, and he talks about what they also call a group of figures that are underworld figures that are in a group like this of the Sicily background or the Italy background. He calls them a Mossad. He doesn't call them Israel. He calls them, that's what the term is. The criminology term is Mossad. I
Interesting.
I have the clip. People can go find it. People can go look at it. You can listen to the full testimony to see I didn't take it out of order. He uses that, and I hear it, and I go, "Is this what everyone's mentioning when they say Mossad, and it's not the whole Israel thing?" Because that always everyone jumps right to Israel because that's a terminology used there. But in the HSCA testimony, I think it's 3 hours long of Ralph Salerno's testimony. He has used that word 2 times to what the evolution of the word mafia, mafioso, certain cliques, and then he uses other mob terms, and he uses the word Mossad, and he said this is what they call a group from this background who necessarily wasn't from exactly that land, but was here and then developed. And I was like, okay, well, that's different.
That would have that would explain some things, but uh, some of the I'm trying to recollect, like some of them had references to Israel and Mossad being involved with the assassination, and some people on social media, especially people who are new to this story who want to go in. Let's look at the files. It's amazing how many people suddenly became researchers overnight when those documents came out. Like, oh, look, so here it is. The CIA, I mean, Israel did kill JFK. Like,
Well, the Gary Underhill thing was trending when it
yeah,
was released.
that too.
But
But
that kid came out years ago. I already had a clip on it that was a year
yeah,
old
I
when
mean,
that new
it's old
document came
news,
out.
and people didn't understand that. But with this case, it's like what people were doing. I described it as like 2 + 2 = 8. They were, jumping because when when people look at these documents, sometimes they're just references to what the CIA heard other people saying. They weren't necessarily admissions that the CIA was, yeah, Mossad was involved in the assassination. No, they were cataloging that so and so said this. That doesn't mean it's true, but some people were like jumping into it. But there are things, the fact that Angleton was controlling all information, the information flow about Mossad or any connections with Israel on intelligence activities. Interesting. I mean, Angleton's obviously a guy you got to keep your eyes on this whole story.
Again, I don't toss out the whole Israel thing. I'm sure there's a lot of that is linked to that. But I think it's a lot like, you throw so much shit on the wall, something's bound to stick. Like we have a lot of documents that are all pointing every which way. And the best thing we can do is just try and poke holes in the official story at this point.
There are a lot of folks that want to dive right into that and, blame Israel and Mossad for every single event in the last 60 years. And then it devolves into a whole, you know, you can go, it's amazing how quick you can go from, you know, Mossad's potential involvement to, the elders of Zion, I mean, it's just like some of these folks want to, I'm not saying all of them do. And I think
I, I get it.
but it bears scrutiny. And in some respects, there might be some rationality to it because Mossad has a reputation for being a the one of the ultimate intelligence apparatus in the world, and they had their hands in everything, and they had knowledge about everything. It stands to reason that there's probably a legitimate chance that they were aware of what was going on in Dallas, or maybe in some peripheral way participated in the whole operation. But to suggest that you know they were the key players, or they're the ones that pulled everything off in Dallas, right under the noses of everybody else in America that had an agenda against JFK. I'm not buying that one. I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion. But it's something that's out there bears further scrutiny about the length of potential links. And of course, the folks that want to look at that direction will point out that JFK was uh, resisting the allowance of Israel to have nuclear weapons. So that might have been, some folks will say, well, there's the motive. But okay, yeah, but a lot of folks had a motive against JFK. So,
Yeah, I see.
but that
That's the
stuff
point I
is
try and
out
stick
there.
with. The whole everyone trying to narrow down either it's LBJ or out of this or this. I get it. It's fine if you want to do that, but the best thing we can do right now is just try and point to sources and historical record stuff, and we're still getting historically inaccurate stuff. Like I've been asking everybody from the JFK community is, but the fight that happened at Love Field that we all hear about, where he's going to ride with him, or he can walk or whatever, that statement that JFK made. I hope, like everyone says, it's about Connolly. They're trying to get Connolly out of the JFK's limo. That's not what it was. It was a fight between John Connolly and Ralph Yarborough. Yarborough didn't want to ride with Johnson because I bet Johnson was being himself and he didn't know that he was pissing off Yarborough the whole time. But I have like 7 different oral history interviews and phone calls talking about this feud between John Connolly and Yarborough and how it was terrorizing the whole trip. And then HSCA testimony and so many
So,
others.
what extent does that? Is there something deeper there?
Is
I
it the
mean,
extent that
did Johnson want? Obviously, Connolly and Johnson were thick as thieves.
but it takes out the blame of like the idea that Connolly was going to be in the line of fire, so Johnson was trying to get him removed. I mean, that's a major theory. Again, when you see all this trending, I wanted to ask you this.
Yeah,
You hear the more theories come out. You see people jump to things and say, this is who did it, this is who did it. People who are new. It's a common thing we've all probably done. But I mean, what did you see the most out of the whole releases? I mean, did you see more public interest in the whole discussion? I still felt like there was a little bit of interest, but a lot of people still kind of didn't even know hearings happened. I had been asking some friends and people that I was coming in contact with.
well, uh, again, it's we. I've used that before about moving the needle, and I think that when you just, I have a lot of folks that know that I am involved with the JFK assassination to the degree I am, that aren't necessarily as engaged in the whole, obviously, as you or I are. What about the general public? I think the general public, you can bring this stuff up and you'll hear them say, yeah, there's document, there's stuff that the government's hiding. There is a raised level of awareness among folks in the general public. It's not something that, you know, is going to be a central part of their lives, but I think most folks more than ever before out on the street recognize that something smells about this. This official story is not holding up. And if we were, 61, 62, whatever we are, 63 years down the road, we're not going to, you know, prosecute the perpetrators. Most of all of them are dead. But are we going to get some historical revision? That's what, I'm a little bit biased because I'm a history guy, but to me, that's the highest level of success I think we can achieve is that the, that somehow we set aside this fallacy that Oswald was a little nut, that 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 nothing else was going on in Dallas, when I think the vast majority of Americans don't buy that. I mean, you don't. I think we've succeeded on a level of, they used the our institutions used to lump the JFK assassination in with every other crazy conspiracy theory that's out there and say, well, this is the mother of all conspiracy theories, and then leave that kind of impression that conspiracy theories are always a lie or a baseless fantasy. I don't think you get that. And I think that even folks in the media now have moved away from that position. They're more careful to not just dismiss the JFK assassination as some fantasy anymore. They understand there's some there's a dark side to this story. Now they may not cover it, they may not cover it adequately. They might still, in some cases, cling to the Oswald thing to a bit. But I think we have succeeded in 2025. I think we have succeeded in changing that impression somewhat. Those things don't happen overnight. They may not even happen in our lifetimes. But if you're interested in history, if you want history in an open and free society, in a democracy, if we have that, I'm not sure about that where we're at with it anymore, but you need truth and justice more so than if you're simply a fascist dictatorship where what the truth is whatever we tell you what it is. And that's what has always made the JFK assassination to me so important, even 60 years down the road. That you know this fundamental seminal moment in American history, we need to get it right. That is the thing that we strive for. I mean, or we should be. So,
Can I ask you what you would like to see in some of these document releases, or what would you consider an area that you would like to look more into or know more about? It doesn't have to be who did it. Obviously, I'm not going to look at that part, but I'm asking like just a certain area that Mexico City, for instance. I mean, that's a big puzzling one for all of us.
I've always kind of, when again, I've had to change my whole uh, research outlook or approach because of this lack of a search engine. And prior to that, I could, pick topics like you say and go in and with the previous releases from 2017 on, and do search engines on individuals or operations or things like that, and and be able to collect information in something. It's almost like, well, I'll give back to a little history science, but it's almost Newtonian. Like, Newton always talked about when the scientific experiment, you don't go in with a necessarily a nailed down conclusion about something. You start collecting information and then develop some sort of theory off that information. It's almost like what we have to do here, because uh, it's difficult to look for certain specific areas. I would have liked to see more stuff about myself, more stuff about the Johnson administration. Like you've gone down to the LBJ library or you've done somewhere. It's kind of hard to get into stuff down there. But I would have liked to see more stuff about the goings on about with Johnson in the before and after the assassination and their maneuverings than what we've seen. That might be something to look at. I know I talked to a great researcher named Larry Rivera, who I deal with a lot. We talked about uh, how much of Dave Morales of the CIA and his file is still missing, sanitized, whatever, tons of pages, and who know where they've gone on Morales. I think Morales is a key figure in all this. So there are some individuals too that we would like to see more of. We'd all like to find out where, one of my big subjects has been William Harvey, and where the hell was William Harvey? Did he come back to the United States?
Or how about release the Manchester tapes?
And of course, that one, yeah, I think everybody's kind of,
I don't believe Manchester was being honest about anything that he said, but I would like to know to verify through those tapes. Um,
well, I think along about '07, I think '08, ABC almost had a deal with the Kennedy family about releasing all those Manchester tapes, and then that fell through. I think maybe it was too explosive. I mean,
I don't know, because why O'Donnell's stuff's not released either. The family won't release that. Not the Kennedy family, but O'Donnell's.
one person who has control of that is obviously JFK's daughter, Caroline.
Well, that's not
Uh,
freaking
she's
happening.
she's got yeah, she has got the control. I mean, and what everybody liked to hear would be Jackie Kennedy's interview with Manchester, and I think there's a lot of people think that that Jackie Kennedy was highly suspicious of Johnson and the people around Johnson, and indicated as such. And it was too explosive. They had to they had to cover it. I think that's the one thing. If we could see those Manchester tapes or not, there wouldn't be anything to see. There something you need to hear. Uh, you're right. Uh, what did I'm not sure if there's interviews beyond. You mentioned it, Kenny O'Donnell. I don't know if there's any RFK interviews mixed into Obviously, Manchester talked to everybody.
Well, Manchester got Berkeley. There's some things that were attributed to Berkeley that Berkeley has denied in oral history interviews. Some things that were attributed to people that were in connection with Johnson's administration that they've all denied. It's hard because I'm listening to LBJ's library. I've listened to over like 800 hours of his tapes. I've made clips on them all, so you can all watch them. They're about a minute long sometimes. I got some good revealing ones I'm going to share with you here in a second. But a lot of it's been like, I'm not anti-Kennedy. Who calls me anti-Kennedy? And you look, I have the phone calls to Ted Kennedy on the day RFK died and the day JFK died. I have the phone calls to, other family members of or people that were in connection with, like Jackie and others, where Johnson called them on the day or something in relation to that, where he's apologizing, he's being heartful. He's like, I'm so sorry this happened, and he's like, I feel your pain. Give Rose a hug for me, kiss, and all this type of stuff. There's a lot of obviously things that I think have been super exploited to make the Johnson narrative fit that I don't necessarily know if I believe. I think Johnson was brash. I think he was a harsh guy, but I also think that's what we call being a Texan. His form of hospitality is not going to fit a Washington and California reporter's thing of hospitality. They're going to call it abrasive.
If you take the darker view of Johnson, which I kind of do, I mean, first of all, psychologists have determined that Johnson was a absolute psychotic, serial liar. So I'm not sure I'd take anything to credence of what he put on tape in terms of massaging the Kennedy people after the assassination. And then the other thing you have to take into account is somebody pointed out, a great researcher named Ed Tatro said, yeah, Johnson had a taping system in the White
But
House.
so did Kennedy.
Yeah, but Johnson had control. Like I think it's Ed Tatros, the guy, great researcher, said, unlike the Nixon thing where everything was recorded, Johnson had ability to shut that taping system on and off. In other words, I think Johnson was aware of everything was being what he wanted people to hear in posterity.
Or he just turned on the TV and began a conversation. I have many recordings that you can barely hear the people talking, but he turned on the TV.
He controlled he controlled that narrative. He controlled what was being recorded and what wasn't. And some of those, yeah, I've listened to some of that stuff where he's, basically even kind of flirting with Jackie Kennedy, like it's kind of sickening, actually. I don't,
She kind of did it back too, which is even weirder on it.
yeah, they
I
just
believe her statement
whether that
was,
was
if I came and visited you, people would think I was flirting around with two presidents or something like that.
due here. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. But anyway, that's peripheral stuff. But yeah, anything, what else have you got for me?
I'm actually going to share some clips here that I think you might find interesting. I was going to try and find one of the clips and comments because Johnson made a lot of comments throughout the years. In particular, if you look up James Rowley on the Discover LBJ site, which is the presidential library, you hear some phone calls. Well, it turns out JFK wasn't the only problem, didn't have the only problem with the Secret Service. Johnson mentioned in 4 different calls throughout 2 different years with various people saying that I don't like all this damn Secret Service around me. There are a bunch of 100 little tin soldiers lined up, bound to fall over, and a gun go off and get one of us killed. Now, if you look this up, this had just been reported last year. Johnson almost got shot on the Dallas trip. It was before they actually flew into Dallas. You can look it up. The Secret Service almost shooting somebody. It was Johnson. It was at night, and the person didn't know who Johnson was. It was just a shadow figure. And this story was recounted. And Johnson had mentioned this again throughout. It's confirmed throughout LBJ phone calls. He's talking and ringing out Rowley about the Secret Service riding too close to his bumper. He's got a slam on his brakes. One of the Secret Service ran over this guy's foot that he's writing a letter to currently. He had a very big problem with Rowley, and he said, I'm just going to get Hoover's FBI to guard me because they can guard me better than your guys can, and we know because of what happened in Dallas. And he states that to Rowley on the phone. So I think Johnson had a big problem with Rowley as much as, or the Secret Service as much as Kennedy did, if not even a little bit more. But obviously Kennedy paid the price on that one. I wanted to play this one because I mentioned to you off air about the Bay of Pigs comment, which I don't think a lot of people have seen this. This was RFK speaking with Alan Dulles. Now, this was about a Mississippi investigation where a couple of black students had been killed or they had gone missing, and it was Hoover and Alan Dulles trying to figure out where these guys were located. Is it showing up on the screen? It might take a second.
Just says started screen sharing here. Oh, that's all. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Good. Here it is.
But I think even, you see, even if that's not true, the fact that you could report that, or I mean, that you found it, just if President Johnson has to take some steps later on, you know, and these things have such an effect across the country. It's not just Mississippi, but just have an effect across the country. I mean, this is not just a local.
Why did you pick me for this?
Because I know you.
I've been a little mad at you, you know, a little bit on this Bay of Pigs book, but I forget that very easily.
Oh, well, I'm glad. But anyway, you know,
I don't stay angry long.
Yeah. Well, fine. But I think it could be, and I think the president feels it could be a big help.
Well, I'd do anything for the nation, you know,
Yeah.
any time. I never refused. I just have a little question of my...
Well, I'm sure you could do it.
Wise do.
But
He wants to announce it tonight? The president wants to announce
Yeah, I think he'd like to do if it works out with Governor Johnson. Here he is back again.
Yeah.
Mr. Dulles?
Yes, Mr. President.
And then there's this one I wanted to play about C.D. Jackson, speaking with Robert Anderson.
With horns, did the best it could, and I need a little interference now.
Well, you'll get it.
Well,
I talked today with Jim Lennon.
yeah.
C.D. Jackson is in the hospital. He's the fellow who really runs Time Lapse Fortune.
Yeah.
And he had a hospital, had an operation. He got to be bite.
Mm.
And he's incommunicado in the hospital. So the next man in line over there is Jim Lennon. And I went over and talked to Jim, and he knew that this fellow Graham Graves was down to see you.
3 o'clock this morning I talked to them.
I know. And he says that they're going to completely reevaluate that thing. And he's got to talk to Graves, he's got to talk to Harry Luce, and he's going to do that. And of course, I'm sorry that C.D. Jackson isn't there, because C.D. Jackson is the real authority.
Mm.
But they won't bring him home from the hospital until a couple of days from now. And so he can't talk to her. He can't talk to a man that's sick. But I did have a long talk with Jim, and Jim's wife is Governor Scranton's
Sister.
And he's perfectly sympathetic, but he wanted to get in.
And then there's this one over here. This one was about the Schlesinger's book on Dean Rusk. It's LBJ and McGeorge Bundy on 7/30/65.
And I can't tell you how contrary it is to my own view of any kind of responsibility in this sort of thing. And I don't really think that, I think they could write 1,000,000 words and even supposing they got something that hurt, nobody paid attention to it. Dean Rusk is a bigger man today than before that Schlesinger thing came out in life, and it's going to be like that with that kind of book. You just don't have to lose any sleep over it.
I think that's right. I get right. But I think it
I'll zoom in for you, David.
have to, if they keep up sometime, kind of.
So you're going to have to write your story of your own, but write it right, and I would not get into a skunk match with these people. It's not worth it. And I like them both, but I think they've both done something unforgivable.
I included this again. This is a minute clips. I have only a minute to do this, so I have to make them in parts, or I do with that little text. You can pause the clip while you're listening to it and then read it yourself. This one was with Richard Helms about keeping past presidents informed. We all kind of assume that somebody's getting inside information from somewhere. LBJ admits in this phone call with Richard Helms that I need you to go to Richard Nixon, get the okay from him that you can keep me informed. So if press comes to my ranch, I'm also informed on the subject matter of what's going on during the presidency. That is highly illegal. But he states that I had done this for Eisenhower, and Eisenhower or whoever, we've done it for Truman as well, too. So I want you to keep this going. And he's talking to Richard Helms about this. And there's 3 different ones. There's not this one. It's the one before that one. There's this one, keep me updated. And then there's this one. So I'll kind of play 2 and move on.
Yes, Nick. Sir, I just wanted to report to you. You were quite right, as you usually are. I was asked to stay on, and this will be announced sometime after December the 5th.
Well, that's good. Awfully glad, Dick.
Well, I just want you to know, sir, you were so kind to me and so thoughtful, and I will stay on and do the best I can.
Well, you do a good job. The government's good to have you. And first thing you make them agree to do is to keep ex-presidents brief so they don't make an ass of themselves, and tell him that your instructions have been to tell Eisenhower everything that I know, tell Truman everything I know that he'll hear, and neither one have ever abused it unless it is abused.
And then I wanted to play this one, which is we're talking about George.
What was the date on that one that we just played?
11/15/68, and there's another one here from 11/15/68 I can play too.
68. My goodness. Okay.
But sitting down there on the ranch, and everybody asking you from time to time what's happening, commenting and imagining that you're one of 1 or 2 men that have been president, you need good information. And when you asked me what to tell him, I said everything I know, everything you tell me. And that's what I've told Buzz Wheeler and the rest of them to do with Truman, with Eisenhower. And I've had a perfect relationship. And I really want to help him because we're in trouble, and I know the trouble I've had, and I don't have the answers. And I hope he does. I want to help him get them any way I can. But I can't have them unless I have a little information. And from time to time, I want somebody to come down, and I don't want to have to go to Dick Russell or somebody in the house or George Mahon.
I have, like I said, I have another one that continues that one. But before that, I wanted to play this one about people's demeanor around a president we had mentioned. This is George Reedy's interview, and I can't forget who's interviewing him right now, but it's a talk show this guy had.
Assistants and ordinary citizens change their demeanor in the presence of the President of the United States?
Oh, yes. I can recall people that have known Lyndon Johnson all of his life. And when I'd take them into the Oval Room, all of a sudden their knees would start to clack and their voices would quaver. Many people have disputed this with me, but it's very interesting what happens to those people when they do get in the presence of a president, even a president they dislike. I can remember 1964 when both Barry Goldwater and George Wallace were running around the country accusing Lyndon Johnson of every crime from moping the highways to carrying concealed ideas. They both had to come into the White House to see Johnson. I've forgotten why now. The reasons were rather trivial. Those 2 men became as meek and mild and overawed. Now, they weren't afraid of Lyndon Johnson. Barry Goldwater had known him for years. And George Wallace is certainly not a man who lacks courage. It was just that you cannot stand in the presence of the president without being awed.
There's something in our terminology that reflects this. The president, the presidency,
yes,
in capital letters.
And I got this one about you have to double down we mentioned.
Try to picture yourself as president. You've given an order. 4,000 or 5,000 men get killed because of the order you've given. Are you going to say to yourself, I'm not talking now about making propaganda, talking to other people. Are you going to say to yourself, my God, 4,000 or 5,000 men are dead because I was a damn fool? I killed those men? No. You know what you're going to say? You're going to say those men died in a noble cause, and we've got to be sure now that the cause for which they sacrificed is not in vain. So you're going to send 10,000. You get some of those killed, and you're going to send 20,000. Get a big bunch of those killed, you're going to send 40,000. But there is another very subtle point. Once the government decides that a president has made up his mind, the whole force of the government closes in to reinforce his thinking and to tell him how best to do it. The advice a president gets after a certain point is not whether he should or should not do something. He'll get that at the beginning. But once he makes a decision, then everybody tells him how best to do it.
Isn't that gives me like goosebumps, dude, hearing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, I mean, Brady's actually reflecting the same thing I mentioned earlier about, it's not, you don't question what the president's done. It was an awful decision. You try to make it sound like it wasn't that bad. We got to carry on.
Well, he's stating from an outside opinion that was involved inside, stating this is how people are thinking. He's not saying or defending anything. He's just saying this is how it goes. This is how the politics work, which I think illuminates what we've all been saying for so long.
It's almost like a Pavlov's dog reaction, or closing ranks in a bureaucracy. We use that term in sociology about people in any bureaucracy. And the United States government is the biggest bureaucracy in the world. There's always a tendency to close ranks. It's very difficult. I mean, a lot of people give JFK credit for being that, for openly admitting that the Bay of Pigs was wrong. It was a disaster, and taking responsibility for it. You think Johnson was going to admit that he made mistakes in Vietnam? No.
No, why would any president do that? And then why would any president be the first one to retreat? Nobody wants to lose a war.
Nope. They're going to
just
defend
ego.
what they're doing. They're going to rationalize what they're doing, especially in war, where, like Reedy made a great point, where people are dying. Do you get out, cut your losses, admit you're wrong? No, you throw more people in there. That's exactly, he hit it on the head, didn't he?
Yep. And then I had this one about Richard Helms.
A woman affiliated with DGI, Cuban intelligence, knew about the assassination before it occurred. In other words, it suggests the possibility of foreknowledge. Do you recall having this conversation ever being brought to your attention?
I really can't remember. I just don't have any idea. I imagine it would have been brought to my attention, and I imagine that we would have tried to follow up to find out what it meant, but I don't have any personal recollection of it.
Do you know whether this particular information was ever communicated to the Warren Commission?
I have no idea.
Do you think that it should have been?
I would have thought that it would have been one of the things that would have been reported to them, but I don't have any specific knowledge that it was. Does it not show up in the Warren Commission reports?
Again, Mr. Helms, I'm not in a position to answer questions.
I'm sorry. I won't ask you any more questions, Mr. Goldsmith.
I appreciate that.
A lot of Richard Helms' HSCA testimony is kind of like he tries to make jokes and kind of dismiss the whole thing, and this one wasn't Oswald.
But it was not the CIA's jurisdiction to keep an eye on him in the United States, and the amount of information available at that time, based on which one could make an interrogation, was pretty thin, for the simple reason that how were we going to find out in the Soviet Union what Oswald had done there except from his own statements? We had no independent means of verification. We didn't have that good an organization inside the Soviet Union. We had no means of following up on these leads.
Yes, sir. Back up, man. Come on, man. President? No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I lived in the Soviet Union.
I was just playing the Patsy part at the end of that. And this one is the 201 file on Oswald.
Counsel Goldsmith is looking through his notes.
What is a 201 file?
I believe a 201 file, if memory serves, is simply the number given to a type of file in the agency in which personality information is placed. In other words, if you open a 201 file on the chairman of this committee, for example, it would simply be information that had come into the agency which involved that gentleman.
Why would the agency have opened a 201 file on Oswald?
Why would it have?
Yes, sir.
Well, I believe at some point a decision must have been made that Oswald was perhaps a matter of continuing interest, and therefore the information which we held on him should be put in the file.
Again, there's a lot of stuff. I have a lot of clips. Like I said, Who Knew Oswald in the Agency is another one. Separate. I'm not going to play them all because I've played it kind of enough here. But I think like you look at some of the stuff that we do have available compared to the stuff that we don't, or are we looking through documents to find? There's a lot of stuff given in HSCA testimony audio versions. There's a lot of stuff given in LBJ phone calls that's more revealing, not just on the particulars of who did it, but more on the factor of understanding the more context, the historical context, Connolly's kind of mishaps and fights with Jerry Bruno on the Dallas trip, the choosing of the women's trade mart over the, or the choosing of the trade mart over the women's building. Would that turn have to go through Dealey Plaza? You know, Stuart McKinney asked John Connolly that, and John Connolly said no, they could have took Stemmons Freeway and just went straight to the women's building, so they wouldn't even have to go and buy Dealey Plaza. These are all things that kind of add up and bring more historical context, especially for someone who might be new to the case after sparking up interest because it's trending all over the place. I know everybody was talking about it and writing articles about it when a lot of these files were getting released. Again, I think that's just as important as documentation is on certain contexts and things we don't have documentation on. Certain personal interviews, Malcolm Kilduff and others, but I found it very illuminating.
You've got, some people make the mistake of, well, it's all about the documents and it begins and ends there. And no, it doesn't. You still have to look at the, I don't know if you want to call it testimony or the statements made by individuals. Now, in some cases, that might be hearsay. In other words, we can't corroborate what this person's saying. But just because something is hearsay, I don't think that's a reason to eliminate it as evidence either. I think you have to take it into context. You have to, Richard Helms
lied his ass off in the committees, but if I have 12 testimonies about Connolly and Yarborough fight, then that's
he's at the core of CIA mentality about you don't give up anything, you lie about everything. But I thought it was interesting his discussion about the 201 files, and there's actually a document that was released not in this latest batch, but in one of the others prior to that, which actually kind of delineates exactly what the criteria was to open a 201 file on someone. Very interesting. I have that document, and by every respect, the CIA just cannot pass off the fact that they opened a 201 file on Oswald. And whoever that member of Congress was asking that question is totally justified. The reality is the CIA would not have opened a 201 file on Oswald if they did not have operational interest. Why else would they do it? You're just going to monitor someone? Out of some chance reason? No. They had operational. Everyone that they opened up 201 files on, they had operational interest in. That might ultimately lead to some connection in some cases not. But that is an undeniable fact, that alone kind of eliminates the idea that Oswald was just some lone nut, who strolled into the book depository and made a last-second decision to kill the president. If that makes any sense.
I'm going to try and play this real quick, but what you just mentioned about the security index and stuff like that, it's James H. Gale, who was in the FBI, who was in charge and was questioned. I don't have his photo. There's no photo available for him, but he was the FBI's lead investigator on the whole Oswald scenario. He talks about this, and he's very sarcastic and not wanting to be there when he's asked these questions. And I think it's pretty revealing of some things, but again, it's just hearsay, but I just think it's interesting if you care about the case.
How often would they be checked if they were on?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No.
Would it be as often as once a year? Don't you even have any idea?
I don't know. I think maybe it might have been, I've forgotten. Since I've been out 15 years, and frankly, I don't remember how often we checked them at that time.
You said something about checking where they're located. Were they kept track of as to location?
I don't recall the details at this time as to how we did that.
But do you know whether you did that or not?
I think we did. To the best of my recollection, I think that was done.
And you wouldn't have any knowledge as to whether people like the Secret Service would check on people in the localities or on the security index?
I don't know what procedure they were following after the assassination. I can't recall at this time the recommendations that I made. I don't have a memoranda in front of me concerning that. I know I made another inquiry concerning the security index and those procedures, but I've forgotten that now in the 15 years that have elapsed.
That was Sawyer of the HSCA asking James Gale. And I'll play this last one here.
How did you investigate the handling of the Oswald security case?
So in handling, the first thing I did was pull all the files that we had down at the seat of government. I made a thorough review of all the material which we had on Lee Harvey Oswald, all the cases, investigative cases that we had opened on him. I thereafter interviewed certain personnel in the Internal Security Division, and I also sent out teletypes and made telephone calls to various field officers which were involved to obtain explanations from pertinent personnel as to what were considered as possible deficiencies in the investigation of Lee Harvey Oswald prior to the assassination.
Sorry about the tape quality. Again, that's not my fault. That's just how these HSCA tapes were left after all these years. They're hard to kind of clear up some things. I tried my best with some of the audio of it. But it was also, just like I said, revealing. They talked about why was it called Henry in the 201 file. Did you guys do that on purpose, or was that a misfiling mistake? Helms said it could have been a misfiling mistake. And, there was just things where obviously you could tell he's not being honest in some of those things. And it's easy to tell when LBJ's lying on some of his phone calls. But I just think a lot of this just brings more curious minds, not saying it draws conclusions, but it can also bolster things and confirm things. And again, we've completely neglected the LBJ library. A lot of us have. I've been digging through it and trying to put up stuff because they do mention some stuff about the assassination, but a lot of stuff is just filling in relationships and holes and questions and answers. I mean, we got Richard Russell on tape on 12/7 talking about how the hell did Oswald miss the road and then hit 2 shots directly in the car? That doesn't make any sense to me. And he's saying that with LBJ, and LBJ's like, why does it matter? He's like, cuz one bullet doing all this damage. And it's like he's saying there, like Richard Russell is telling LBJ this doesn't make sense. And LBJ's like, you know what, that doesn't make sense, but I don't see what the point is. Because LBJ didn't care. He was just like, it's going to go back to Hoover. Go on. So I wanted to show those. I thought you might find those interesting. You're a history guy. I like history too. So we're trying to comb it through.
Good.
But yeah, that's all I had basically to show. David, you given me enough of your time. If there's anything else you want to mention here at the end, is there any other people out there?
No, I mean, it's a great talk. Appreciate it, Robbie. I mean, let's hopefully we can do this again soon. There'll be more, there's going to be more releases this year, I'm sure, more time to dig into things as we get into November. Obviously, I have my conference in Dallas again, which is focusing on the declassified documents. We'll be having that, I think, November 20 through 23. Encourage people to go onto the JFK Historical Group, my website, and if you have any interest in, it's a great time and revelatory weekend always to go to Dallas, Texas, the time of the assassination, and see some of the best speakers in the country that will come in, that we'll have at our conference. There's also a remembrance ceremony on Dealey Plaza on the day of the 22nd. It's at the Doubletree in Dallas on Market Street. People, if they have any interest, or we will also be offering a Zoom for that for people who can't make it to Dallas. So we're expecting to have have a great conference and talk about a lot of these things that are so important that are coming up as we speak. So, and again, I'm thankful and happy that you were allowing me to come in and speak today, Robbie. Thank you very much.
Do you have more speakers this year than you've had before? It seemed like I saw a lot on the list.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that there's, I don't say any more, I mean, it's a full roster. I mean, that's for sure. We get some of the best people, and then, well, I just had somebody today email me about they want to speak. They're an Italian doctor who's got something to say. I mean, there's a lot of folks that we unfortunately don't have time to have everybody speak. Because there's a lot of interest in doing that, but we try to get folks that are good and have new information, that have done some investigative work, that are not just necessarily regurgitating the same thing again and again. Folks are hungry about this story. People that come to Dallas are very serious about it, and we try to provide them with as much information as we can.
Well, I appreciate the work you do, David, and I appreciate the time you've given me to talk on my show many times and kind of educated me through the process of when I first started looking into this case and giving me the time to be able to discuss it as well, too. I appreciate the large interest I have in it now when it comes to just consuming my everyday life. But thank you, David, for giving me the time. And I encourage anybody out there listening to go check out some of the clips on the channel, but also check out some documents and check out some of the stuff that I'll link in the description that are David's links to either the historical conferences that he does or any of the other material I can find that I can put in the description below. Thank you again, David, and thank you everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.